Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional League, Dynasty League, PPR League, IDP League, even Daily Fantasy Football League. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, where we discuss everything in the world of fantasy football. As always, I'm your host, Jeremiah, and I am back again with the latest fantasy news for you guys. And probably one of the biggest names in this year's free agency class has to be Adrian Peterson. No, he became a free agent after the Minnesota Vikings have declined the team option for 2017. He was slated to make $18 million, so of course the Vikings were going to cut him. But apparently, it looks like Adrian Peterson might take a pay cut to play with the New England Patriots. Can you imagine that? New England and Adrian Peterson? I don't know. But, Adrian Peterson, he really wants a Super Bowl, and I do think this team, the Patriots, will give him the best chance to do that. So, New England is obviously not going to pay him a lot of money. They're obviously not going to do that. LeGarrette Blount is going to be a free agent this year, and I do want to remind you that LeGarrette Blount, he generated 18 touchdowns last year. 18. Can you imagine if Adrian Peterson played the same role as LeGarrette Blount last year? Can you imagine how many touchdowns Adrian Peterson could have in this offense? It's a lot. A lot to think about. I think his fantasy value might rise up a little bit. But, of course, with James White and Dion Lewis with the Patriots still, they're still going to do the passing downs. I do think that this team has enough depth for Adrian Peterson to get rest off the field. And I do think that Adrian Peterson wants to be that early down running back. So, I do think this will give Adrian Peterson a realistic chance of getting a Super Bowl ring and finishing his career out on a high note. But from a fantasy football perspective, I think if Adrian Peterson does sign with the Patriots, I do think that his fantasy value will rise, particularly due to the goal line work that he will receive. Because, the Patriots offense, they're always going to score. Always going to score. And, Adrian Peterson is the type of back that can score within the 1. Are you kidding me? If you have Adrian Peterson at the 1 yard line and you're about to score, wouldn't you want him to score that touchdown for you? Like, why wouldn't... It's too good to be true. It's just a too good to be true scenario. And I do think that, the Patriots will be one of the teams that will contact Adrian Peterson about a contract. And remember, free agency starts this Thursday. And it is Tuesday. And, agents can begin negotiating with teams today. And it looks like New England will be one of those teams that Peterson's agent will contact. And remember, we got to think about all the other teams that Peterson could potentially go to. You know, there is the Oakland Raiders. Latavius Murray looks like he is going to move elsewhere. So that's a possibility. But I don't know if he will take a pay cut to play for the Raiders. There is the Giants. I do think the Giants could give him the most money. And there is the Vikings, but I don't think the Vikings are going to get him back. I do think that they want to get Adrian Peterson at a reasonable price. And, you know, the Vikings, I don't know if they can contend for a Super Bowl. They can probably contend for the playoffs, but I don't know about the Super Bowl. So I don't know if AP will go back there. Then you got the Houston Texans. Houston Texans will be a really good Super Bowl contender if they can add AP and Tony Romo. But I do think that Adrian Peterson to the Patriots could go really well for fantasy owners. Because remember, LeGarrette Blount, his fantasy value was the whole reason that he had fantasy value was because he was with the Patriots. Think about LeGarrette Blount's days with the Steelers. They weren't that good. You know, he was constantly in trouble. They just weren't good. They weren't as productive as he was with the Patriots. And just look at Adrian Peterson. Who would you rather have in your backfield if you're Tom Brady? LeGarrette Blount or Adrian Peterson? So I just can't get over the fact that LeGarrette Blount had 18 touchdowns in the Patriots offense. I think AP can possibly get like more than 20 if that's the case. If Adrian Peterson played the role of LeGarrette Blount for the Patriots last year, I think AP would have got at least like 25, 27. And I'm not trying to over-exaggerate or anything, but like you got to think about that. Like, who's been the better running back throughout their entire career? Adrian Peterson. And I know LeGarrette Blount is a younger running back. I do know that. But come on now. AP is one of those guys that's on another level. You can't forget that. And You know, the Patriots, they're always reluctant to pay quarterbacks over $2 million per year. So that's probably one of the reasons why LeGarrette Blount won't be back, because he wants more money. AP, I think he's realized that he's made enough money and then he wants to win a Super Bowl, because that's the only thing that's not on his Hall of Fame resume. It's not. But can you imagine if Bill Belichick swoops and steals the best running back on the market? Well, not the best running back, but the best name, the biggest name on the market for cheap. Because remember, Bill Belichick did do that with Corey Dillon in 2004. So he's done it before. And Corey Dillon worked out pretty well for him. So I do think that this is a possible fit. I do think it's something to really talk about. I think it could be realistic. I think it could happen. And I don't want to think about Tom Brady and the Adrian Peterson team, because I feel like that would be unfair. I remember Tom Brady, he still looks like he's in the prime of his career. Adrian Peterson, he is past his prime. He's on the other side of 30. But I do think that the Patriots will give Adrian Peterson the best chance to be a winner. It will give Adrian Peterson the best chance to pretty much ride off into the sunset. And, you know, AP, he did say he has some good years left in him. And maybe so. We've seen Adrian Peterson come back from freakish injuries before. Because remember, he was suspended for 2014, and he came back and led the league in rushing in 2015. We've seen him come back to an ACL injury, and and then the year after, he became the MVP at rushing 2,000 yards. We didn't see that same freakish Adrian Peterson last season, because, you know, he did have multiple injuries, especially the torn meniscus. And Adrian Peterson probably had his worst year. I think he did, not probably. But I do think that, you know, the Patriots have really good running back depth. And Tom Brady will be the best quarterback that he's ever played with. Because remember, Adrian Peterson, the best quarterback that he's played with was Brett Favre in 2009. So he hasn't had a chance to play with a really good quarterback. So I do think with Tom Brady being the Patriots quarterback, I think he's going to take that pay cut. I don't think he cares about the money right now. And don't get me wrong. Yeah, he might care about the money, but I think he cares about the Super Bowl ring a little bit more. Okay, well, I'm going to take my first break, and when I get back, I'm going to discuss a couple of names that are slated to hit the free agent market this week. I'm going to talk about Terrelle Pryor and another couple of names when we get back to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. And one of the biggest breakout fantasy performers from last year was none other than Terrelle Pryor. And he was probably the best receiver or the best player on the Cleveland Browns. And that's actually kind of saying a lot because remember, this was the first full year that Terrelle Pryor made the transition to receiver from quarterback. And he's slated to hit the free agent market this week. And he's getting a lot of interest from teams. That includes the New York Giants, the San Francisco 49ers, the Tennessee Titans, the Philadelphia Eagles. These are all teams that need receivers. So, according to Cleveland.com, those are all the teams that are interested in Terrelle Pryor. And I actually think Terrelle Pryor was very impressive last season. He was a 1,000-yard receiver. He had 77 catches. And, the Browns, they didn't rule out re-signing Pryor. But I think, Pryor he's not going to get the money that he wants from Cleveland. The only thing I'm really worried about for Terrelle Pryor is, not Terrelle Pryor, but the teams that do sign him, I think they're going to practically overpay for him. But I do think that he will get a really good opportunity to go to one of these teams and be possibly the number one guy. I actually think Terrelle Pryor is better fit as a number two guy. But I kind of want to play hypotheticals here. I'm going to see if he goes to the Giants, he's obviously not going to be the number two guy. He's going to be the number two guy behind Odell Beckham Jr. But I do like that potential tandem of Odell Beckham Jr. and Terrelle Pryor. If he goes to the 49ers, he's probably going to be the number one guy. I remember the 49ers did re-sign Jeremy Curley to a 3-year deal. They did release Torrey Smith, so I do think that he can be the number two guy there. He can definitely fill that number two role because it looks like it looks like Jeremy Curley was pretty much their best receiver last year. But I think Jeremy Curley, he kind of has more of the mold of a slot receiver type of player. But I think whoever is the quarterback, I do think Terrelle Pryor is going to have success there. Because remember, Terrelle Pryor played with like 5,000 quarterbacks with the Cleveland Browns last year. So I think Terrelle Pryor will be fine with the 49ers. Tennessee Titans, I like Terrelle Pryor to the Tennessee Titans. He, possibly playing with Marcus Mariota. I actually like that. And, Tennessee, they can probably draft a receiver. I think they could, especially at the number 5 spot in the draft or later in the middle of the first round. I think, Tennessee is a really good spot for Terrelle Pryor because, Terrelle Pryor, I think he wants to be a number 1 receiver, and I do think that would be a really good spot for him. And, with the Philadelphia Eagles, that's another great spot for Carson Wentz, not for Carson Wentz, but that's a great spot for Terrelle Pryor as well because of Carson Wentz. And that was the biggest flaw of the Eagles' offense last year, was because of, there wasn't many receivers. Jordan Matthews was the best receiver last year, and he dropped passes constantly. So I do think that, Terrelle Pryor is going to land to one of these teams. And according to Charles Robinson of Yahoo Sports, Terrelle Pryor is expected to land between the $10 to $12 million range of a contract. And, I do think that Terrelle Pryor has more potential to be a really good receiver. I do think he just has too much athleticism, and I do think that he can develop to be a really good, solid receiver. I don't think he can be the number one guy on the team, but I do think he can be a really good number two wideout on a very, very good team. And remember, we got to think about the other free agents, receivers on the market as well. Because remember, we got players like Alshon Jeffrey, we got Deshaun Jackson, we got Pierre Garçon, we got Kenny Britt, we got other guys that are slated to hit the free agent market. And don't forget, you got Torrey Smith as well. And speaking of Torrey Smith, the 49ers released him, and he was about to enter the third year of his 5-year contract. And Torrey Smith has been considered to be a one-trick pony. He has been known to be just a speed threat type of guy. But I do think that Torrey Smith is going to get real interest. He's 28. He's still young. He can make a real contribution to a real good team. And, in 2 years, Torrey Smith had 53 catches for 930 yards. And he only has 7 touchdowns in 28 games. So remember, in 2015, when his first year with the Niners, he did lead with 20.1 yards per reception. But yeah, I think he didn't play with a good quarterback. So he wasn't a right fit for this team. And, I think Kyle Shanahan, I don't think he thought that maybe he wasn't a really good fit for this team. But, Torrey Smith was actually pretty solid for Baltimore before he moved to San Francisco. And Torrey Smith only had 1,000-yard season. And that was in 2013 with the Baltimore Ravens. And ever since, his production has dropped significantly. So, I don't know. I think we have to play the wait-and-see game with Torrey Smith a little bit, but I do think that he will be a pretty solid third receiver. But I just think we have to play the wait-and-see game with Torrey Smith because remember, a couple years ago, he was one of the big names on the market, and he did sign that 5-year deal with San Francisco, but it looks like nothing has worked out. And, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, so they're looking for multiple positions, but I do think they could be on the market for a running back. Because remember, Doug Martin is suspended for the first 4 games. We don't know if Doug Martin's going to get back to that Pro Bowl caliber player that he was. We don't know if he's going to be like that when he comes back. So they could be in the market for Adrian Peterson. They could be in the market for a running back in the draft. But I do think that with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers re-signing Jacquizz Rodgers, I do think that gives them more. That means that Jacquizz Rodgers could possibly be the guy to start the year. And remember, Jacquizz Rodgers was really good for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last season. He had his first 100-yard rushing career game in Week 5 versus Carolina. And then he had a 154-yard performance against the 49ers. So, he had pretty good games. I do think that, if he didn't get injured, I do think he could have had an even better year. And I do think that's one of the main things that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will still be on the market for a running back, whether that's Dalvin Cook, whether that's Adrian Peterson. I do think that the running back position is going to be valuable for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers because remember, you still got a young quarterback there in Jameis Winston. You have one of the top receivers in the game in Mike Evans. So I do think with Doug Martin not being there for 4 games, it's definitely going to hurt Doug Martin and his fantasy stock. But I think, Jacquizz Rodgers could possibly be a sleeper to begin the year because remember, he finished the year with 560 rushing yards on 129 carries. He averaged 4.3 yards a carry. But I do think that, we saw some flashes that, he can perhaps maybe produce those type of flashes again. But I do think he can be a sleeper to start the year. It depends on what Tampa Bay does with the running back position. All right, well, I'm going to take my first break. Not my first break, I'm sorry. I already took my first break. I'm going to take my last break. And when I get back, I'm going to discuss some of the rookies and the performances at the NFL Combine this past weekend. When I get back to Going to Meet Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to Going to Meet Concepts Football Podcast. And, the NFL Scouting Combine did occur this past weekend. And we had some really good performances from multiple positions. We had John Ross from Washington breaking the 40-yard dash time. He broke the record for the fastest time ever. He ran a 4.22. And if you don't know, Chris Johnson held the records, and he broke it in 2008, which was a 4.24. So John Ross improved his draft stock. Remember, John Ross was one of the top receivers in college football. He was a speedster. He was one of the top targets for Jake Browning at Washington last year. And, he had 17 touchdowns. He had over 1,000 yards. Pretty good year. He went from a borderline first rounder to probably potentially being picked in the 15 to 20 range. So I do think that he could be like Deshaun Jackson. He's just very similar. And I do think he can be a really good fantasy option for a lot of owners out there, depending on the team that drafts him. And, the draft won't happen until April, so we have a long way to go. And I think one of the top, prospects that were pretty much that everyone was looking at and were the quarterbacks. And, they were the running backs. And we had a lot of good performances at the running back position. And we got Leonard Fournette. He weighed in at 240 pounds. And he ran at 4.5. That's absolutely crazy. He ran at 4.5. And Dalvin Cook also ran at 4.5 as well. Christian McCaffrey, he ran a 4.48. And, this is a really good running back class that I really enjoyed watching this running back class in college football last year. But, the fact that Leonard Fournette ran a 4.51 at 240 really should generate a lot of interest from teams. And I do think that he can potentially be a top 5 pick. He definitely will go in the top 10. But I do think with that 40 time, he'll be a top 5 pick. Dalvin Cook, he ran a 4.49. So he was a little quicker than Leonard Fournette. But I do think Dalvin Cook's going to get really good fantasy value because, he's the type of back that can play all 3 downs. He can be a passing back. He can run on first and second down. So I do think Dalvin Cook's going to be the workhorse for any team that drafts him next year. And I think these are 2 guys I'm really looking forward to watching next season. Christian McCaffrey, he did run a 4.48, I believe. and he looked really good. He looked good in, the pass catching drills, and I do think he's going to be the type of guy that's really shifty. He's going to get a lot of passing down work. He did show that he can run the football, and I do think that whoever team signs him, I do think they're going to try to find different ways, different plays to pretty much not make him fit, this whatever team that he goes on. Like the Patriots, if he happens to go to the Patriots, I do think Bill Belichick and the rest of that staff will find ways for McCaffrey to be successful. The Raiders were one of the teams that could potentially fit McCaffrey. I think I actually like that fit. But, overall, I do think this rookie class is going to be fun to watch. With the quarterback class this year, Deshaun Watson looked like he was the most impressive. He looked like he can be... I think he's the best quarterback in this year's class. I don't know if he's going to start right away. But I don't, as of right now, I don't think any of the quarterbacks in this class, I don't know if they will make an impact in fantasy. So that's why I'm not really going to discuss them a whole lot. But I do think that the running back class will make a huge impact. This receiver class will make a huge impact. And, we got a lot to look forward to in this year's draft. Okay, well, that's going to conclude it for me. I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in to the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast. You can turn into the show in a variety of places: iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, YouTube, and on the GSMCpodcast.com website. You can follow us on multiple social media platforms: Twitter, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. You can follow the Twitter and Instagram at GSMC_football. You can also like the show on Facebook at the Going to Me Concepts Football Podcast. Fantasy Football Podcast. I always get this show confused with the football ones. Sorry about that. But, I'll be back on Friday. Anthony will be here. We will discuss some free agency news. It does start on Thursday, so I'm pretty sure a lot of teams will agree. A lot of people will be on the move, so we will discuss some of the key deals that have occurred. And of course, anything that happens in the world of football that is fantasy related. So I'd like to thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Jeremiah Martinez, and this was the Going to Me Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.